Okay, let's get this ceiling done. So we be putting in a modelled ceiling. The ceiling will actually represent bottom chord of the truss with a gap where we will draw in some ceiling battens, and then we have a 10mm plaster sitting underneath that. So from our view, we shall open the ceiling height views, and first thing is to double check that we are in an existing phase. That should bring up the little section marker that I have in my existing floor plan. Yes. And then once you, as you'll see on screen there, we actually haven't got any walls under there to see at ceiling height, so we need to set an underlay where we'll put the lower floor underneath so we can actually see it. So scrolling up and down through our properties palette, we've got an underlay option. The underlay will be the proposed floor plan, being the first one that we generated at that level. And now you'll see the walls sitting in underneath. Okay, so from the architecture tab at the top, select the ceiling button, and from here select the plain compound ceiling, which compound is meaning multiple layers, which we'll be setting up just in plain, and we shall use the edit type option to duplicate, and we'll call this one our residential ceiling. And from here we shall edit the structure. This is where we'll be setting it all up as we do. So the outside layer is to be set up as a substrate so that it sets up to match with the rest of our timber framing. We set substrate for our timber wall part of our walls, the actual stud wall layer. And the layer we can use on this, not actually sure which one it was on the on our timber frame walls. I can't quite remember which one we used, so I'm going to do a double check and come back onto this. So I'm just going to set it up as a timber option at this stage as a material, but I might need to come back and tweak that. Set that as 90mm thickness. And we need to insert a layer that goes down below the core boundary, which was 30mm, and thermal air layer, and I think there's a thermal air layer as a material type, air infiltration barrier. And the ceiling is 10mm standard plaster as our gypsum wallboard, and finish one. So that's our setup, so that's our structure for our wall. As you can see, total thickness of 130. The substrate timbered 90, that's actually going to be it's kind of the bottom chord of the truss that will be sitting directly on the wall. We'll have a look at that in the inner section at the end of this. So selecting OK, selecting OK again, and Revit actually does give you an option to do an automatic ceiling, and it gives it a fair crack, but it's not quite how we do it. I like to have a little more control over exactly what we need. So select a sketch, and in the sketch options in our draw panel here, all our different options, we use the old pick lines, which one we use a lot, so it's pretty handy. Always use the pick lines when you've got something to select onto, and because I've got walls to select onto, then we'll use that pick lines. and I'll just zoom in a little closer there. We can select onto that middle line. That middle line represents the outside of the timber stud wall. You'll see here that the brickwork outside wall line is there. The inside brickwork line isn't visible because of that step down that we set up earlier. So I'm going to go around and just select all 4 of those external timber frame walls. You will see that the corners are not neat and joined, so we just need to use the trim extend button and select either side on all 4 corners just to neaten it up. If it's not a nice neat corner, it just will give an error message when we try to finalise. So there we have our magenta line around the top of the stud walls. So we select, before we pick on the tick, the height offset seems to default to 2600 for some reason, but we need that height. Because we're working at ceiling height, we need it to sit as a 0. So that's actually sitting at ceiling height, and pick on the tick. As it does with ceilings, nothing to see in this view. You need to actually go into a section before you can see it. Quite a common error message that I get with this one, where people often find that that ceiling that is sitting here, that's the one I've just put in. I'll just pop into thin line so we can see a bit more. There's that ceiling. You can see it's actually sitting at ceiling height exactly, and over the top of the stud wall component of the wall. That ceiling sometimes, if we have it set up so that it's coming in at proposed floor plan, will sometimes be sitting down here. I tend to find that a lot with the first year students as we're working our way through learning all these bits and pieces. It's one of those common little things that happens to us. If you find your ceiling is on the ground, not on the ceiling, then it's simply a matter of selecting that ceiling and changing the level from floor plan to ceiling height. It'll jump up to there. The only other thing that I'll do at this stage is to actually select that ceiling and move it down. So from that line representing the bottom of that truss down on top of the actual wall frame itself, and the plaster and the battens will sit underneath, and when we put our top plates and things on there, we'll actually mask over the top of that little bit of plaster that's sort of crossing through the wall. That's how you do a ceiling. Okay, so let's have a look at doing a roof. Very similar, obviously, to doing the ceiling. You can see here we've got our ceiling in place now. And we shall go into our existing floor plan, and you can actually do the roof in floor plan or ceiling height. It doesn't really matter which one you do it in. When you go to the roof, it actually gives you the option where would you like to put it. So we need this roof to sit at ceiling height. So we select ceiling height and pick yes. The different styles that we have in the standard template are as shown here, and the standard generic 400 is the one that we will be editing and making up our own residential roof. We shall be calling it a sheet roof. So picking on that edit type button, we shall duplicate. By duplicating, it keeps the generic 400 still available to us rather than rename. So we'll go duplicate, call it a sheet roof, and back into edit the structure, exactly the same as their walls and the ceiling that we've just done. Revit does a lot of that very similar style of work. Okay, so by adding in an extra 2 layers, and I'll drop the core boundary over the whole lot on this one. So we've got our core boundary above and below the first layer that we have at number 2. We'll set that up as finish 2, being the tin that'll be over the top, which we made an allowance of 25 millimeters on that one. The air infiltration is going to be our roofing battens, and we'll set that up at 38 millimeters, and the structure one will change the substrate being our timber, which is going to be the top chord of a truss, running up and over the top. And then we need to have a look at these materials, which one we're going to be put in where. So substrate for the 90 millimeter wide part of our truss is going to be the timber material, matching the walls and the ceiling. The thermal air layer, we've got our air layer material that's there. All these standard materials are already set up in our template for us. Now for the tin on the top, we shall go into the materials, and you'll notice here there's not really a sheet roof, colorbond roof that we can generally use, so we're going to make up our own with this one, just using metal as our standard sort of template to work from, and right mouse click and click duplicate, and I'll just call this roofing sheet. And that roofing sheet, whoops, where did it go? Roofing sheet, what we need to do with this one is in our graphics, I'll see if I can stretch that one out a bit, we can see it a bit better. We've got all these different tabs across the top where we can apply all these different materials and things like that. Really at this stage all we need to be able to do is to put in a surface pattern over the top. So using the foreground pattern, I'm just going to pick on there and locate. Just what we need is some vertical lines just going up and down representing that roofing. Actually I might use the model, it gives you a bit more of an accurate 75mm vertical. That's a good pattern that we can use on our roofing just to identify the which directions the corrugates are going, if it was a corrugated roof, showing where the water will flow down towards the gutter, that sort of thing. Second thing I'll do here is that in that colour, sometimes patterns when there's a lot of lines coming through, in a black line they can be quite a bit overpowering on a drawing. So I'm going to pick on the colour here and take those black lines back into more of a grey. So I'm just going to back off by sliding that little arrow up, looking at the new. Once you get in one that you're pretty happy with, sometimes a good idea to keep that colour, just in case, or that grey, in case we come back later on and we want to put in another something else that's a similar roof style or something, and we want to use that same one. Pick on that new colour and pick add. That'll just pop it in on our little custom colours there for us, so we can come back and pick on that. It's either that or you can actually write down these numbers and type them in. And OK. So that's our roof setup. Basic roof, sheet roof. We've got the finish being the tin on the top. We've got a thermal air gap, which is going to be our roofing battens. Then got our substrate of our timber, mimicking our top chord of our truss. And select OK. And OK. And we're ready to go with our roof. The default setting on our roof up here, you'll notice, is that it's on pick walls, which is a good one for our roof. And then we're going to set up an overhang. So we'll put a 450mm wide overhang on this roof, and by coming down onto that wall you'll see the green line popping up. If you favour the inside of that wall, you'll see that it'll actually give you the option to put the eave on the inside. So just make sure you favour the outside of the wall and pick. Favour the outside of the next wall. As I pick this, you'll notice that it'll automatically trim up this time, which the ceilings didn't do for us. Different commands work in different ways. So I've picked on the 4. before we go to the next step, just note this little triangle that we have as an icon. It's not an icon that we can pick on. It's just indicating that each of these lines, or it's going to be a pattern for our roof, has slope. Slope down to each of those 4 points will create a normal old hip roof. Proceed to the green tick, put that roof in place. Again, that roof has disappeared. Off to the section to have a look at it, and there's our roof sitting there, and we can select on that roof. I'll just move that section box a bit, and see the square across the top. That's actually because of the where that's cutting through a modelled roof. I might just return to there and slide that section marker back more central, and it should show me a peak. Yes, there it is. And we've got the ceiling and the roofing style all starting to meet together, and I'll move that roof by picking on it, picking move, and selecting where that bottom part of the roof crosses the ceiling and moving it down to that same point there. So we've got the makings of our bottom chord of the truss, top chord of our truss, and we can start to use different drafting techniques to get rid of that join, to clean it all up to look like a neat join. We've got our trusses cut with our tin coming on, and we're ready to start putting our fascias and gutters and things on. Before we go too much further, just have a look at one of the elevations. I've gone to the existing east elevation, and we can see here that we've got those lines are working quite well, representing the roofing. And by selecting that roof, I can actually change, I might even change that one to 25 degrees as a roof pitch. So that's our roof settings. The next things we're going to add to our template file is fascia and gutter. Similar to what we did with our edge beam around the slab, we're going to sweep a fascia and a gutter around the roof. So we shall create a new family, always save, never put that off, and using the metric profile hosted. So we're going to be drawing a profile, and it's going to be one that will be hosted by something else, hosted by walls, roofs, floors, that sort of thing. So again, we've got our crosshairs, we've got some text on here as well, indicating where things will go. This is our insertion point and the host. When I draw this fascia, I just want it to sit a little bit proud of that host face, so that when we put it on, it hides the edge of the roof, doesn't come through when we're doing elevations and things like that. So let's create a line making reference to, we're going to be coming out from this host face. Okay, so from the create tab, use the line to draw the profile. First thing we're going to do is come out from this face, straight out 3 millimeters, 3, enter, and then I'm going to go straight down 189 being the size of the steel fascia, and come across 33 again being the depth of that steel fascia that we'll be using, and bringing that back up to there. One of the tricks with these profiles, or to be mindful of, is that if you draw a line directly over the top of this line in this way, we're actually going to be leaving a line there that won't work. It'll actually give an error message when we're trying to sweep that across. So you need to be very mindful of not having lines over lines. You will end up with an error message. I'll pop a dimension from the top down to there, and I'll lift all of this up by moving it straight up in. I need it at 29, which will be 31. Uh, 21. So we're down 29. We're out 3mm from the edge. We're total of 33 all the way across. The text doesn't come through on that sweep anyway, that profile. So let's save that off. Save as family. Revit families. I'm into profiles. Fascia. You can see the edge beam is still in there, and now we've got fascia added into that as well. And I'm going to load into project and close file. So that's been loaded into our project. I like to do the sweeps in 3D so you can physically see what's going on. So to put the fascia on, we go to the roof pull down menu. So underneath here we have fascia and gutter. So if we select on fascia, the default fascia type that comes up is just normal old fascia. So go to the edit type and you'll see the settings in this dialog box. First of all, the profile. Let's locate the fascia profile that we've just made and select that, and the material. For the material, we shall start with the default material type and duplicate and call it fascia. For this, I'm going to set a colour in the graphics of red. It obviously can be changed at any time once you're in a project, but defining where that fascia is and where the gutter is and the roof is, we can use colour coding. So we'll make it red, pick apply and OK, and OK. To put this fascia around the edge, as you can see the edges are all highlighting as I'm hovering over with my cursor. The import insertion point for fascia is right onto that top edge of the roof. So I can go around the building, just scrolling around by holding the scroll button in and the shift at the same time, and we can go all the way around. Now I suspect I've gone all the way around there, but I might need to just confirm by going into a shaded view just to see that we've got that red. That's why we made it red, so we can clearly see where it is and where it isn't without having to zoom in too much. You'll also see the roofing sitting just above that fascia, so we can extend that roofing down when we get to our section. Speaking of sections, let's have a look. So there's our fascia sitting on the edge of our roof. It's just sitting at 3mm proud of our roofing so that we don't see the roofing in our elevations, and that's where it sits. Now let's do the guttering. The guttering is the same. It's a bit more of a complex shape this time, so we shall go new family, metric profile hosted. It's the standard template that we'll start with. Again, we've got that same information going on here, and we've got a diagram in our presentation of exactly what we're looking for. Again, need to make sure that we don't double up lines or have lines hiding somewhere that won't let it form a solid object when we use it as a sweep. So you just need to be fairly diligent with this. So starting with a line command, what do we need to come off? 3mm. So I'm going to start on that line somewhere, type in 3, enter. I think it's a bit too far away for that to happen, so we'll try again. Create line, come out 3, and I'll just bring that line all the way straight up. I'm then going to go back and delete that 3mm line. Feel that's part of that diligence, making sure we're not leaving any trash line around that and give us grief. In that same vein, draw a line from here. I'm going to come down 30mm and sweep that across. So the junction between those two is the start from where that gutter is. I'll use maybe trim to tidy up there. That guttering material, I've shown it as being 3mm thick, so I'll use the offset and 3 and place that in place, and using trim tidy it up. So just again, part of that diligence, just making sure we've got everything all working. The next thing we can do is to set up the depth of this gutter. So I've got 70mm on that, so I might, what's the best way to do that? If we start a line, drawing a line, you can draw a line with an offset, which is pretty handy. It's worth experimenting with these sorts of things. So I can draw from that point, and you can see the line is actually drawing 70mm away from where I just picked, and by using the spacebar we can toggle backwards and forwards, and I'll be coming out 125 and using escape and trimming. So we're sort of slowly just defining all these shapes. I'll offset 3mm and use trim to tidy it up again. Just following along and making sure that we are working our way through. 125 is our total width, so I shall copy that one across. 125, offset through 3mm again, and trim. It's a little fancy little way of doing that bull nose, or that curve for our gutter there. I'll show you that one in a moment. So the front face of the guttering looks like it just goes up above the line there, so we need 105, and looks like I think I drew a 10mm circle on that end, so I'll bring that line up. 105, but that's kind of to the top of that circle. It doesn't have to be spot on this one, as long as it's still a neat tidy one line, so we can still get the sweep working. So create line, and we'll go to the circle option, and I think just on the line there, just in between that 3mm on that line somewhere, and I'll do 5, which will give me a 10mm circle. I'll drag that line back down so we can see where it all sits. So how do we tidy all this up? What I'm thinking is that if I use a split element, which is this button here, let's watch the video. So it just splits anything, walls, lines, anything. So I'll pick split, and I'm going to pick just on that side of that line on that circle, and I'm hoping that that will let me trim between here and here, yes, and again here and here. So we've got that neat and tidy. I know there's only one line, there's no hidden lines in amongst all of that. So getting the arc for this quad gutter, there's a handy little tool that we can use. In your drawing of a line, we can use this little button here. It's called a fillet arc. Let's watch the video. Hopefully the video works on yours. So we'll pick on that fillet arc, and I'm going to select the very bottom line and the very outside line, and as I bring my cursor backwards and forwards, you can see there that it's giving me a radius. If we knew exactly what that radius is, you can actually type it in. I'm going to just sort of go by eye, put it in around about 40 millimeters. So we'll type in 4. Won't let me type in 40, so I'm going to put it in around about 40 degrees. So 40 millimeters. Again, offset defaults back to 3, and then trim. There's multiple different ways we could have drawn that shape up, but I'm pretty confident that that was all one line. Just remember that if you do have trouble with your profile not working, that we could have, a little line or something like that can't form a solid object. It has to be a profile of exactly one, and if you've got two lines over the top of each other, won't let it form a solid object either. So I'll save this gutter profile, and I shall load into project and close. Proceed to a 3D view, and we shall be applying the new gutter onto the roof. So from the roof pull down menu, select gutter. In the gutter properties type selector, we shall go edit type, locate our profile, which is gutter profile here. The material, for this material I'm going to duplicate fascia, call it gutter, and change it to green. Again, it's only a visual thing so that I can clearly see where the gutter is and where it's not working. Apply and OK. Again, as you bring the cursor up, you'll notice that the edges are flashing up where it wants to put it in place. And if you rest over the edge of that roof and pick there, it'll apply that gutter in place. Again, if it's just come up with an error message, go back to that profile, make sure it's squeaky clean, there's no additional lines. Another tip I'll give you here is that I'll just delete that out of here again. And when you do a roof gutter, same with the fascia, if you rest over that edge, press the tab button on your keyboard once, and you'll see that that's highlighted all of the walls around, all of the edge of that roof, all the way around the whole building, whatever shape building it is, and it'll then apply that guttering all in one hit. So we can get a fascia and gutter on there pretty quickly around the whole building, and we're starting to get elevations with fascias and gutters, roofing, it works. Set up in our template. Okay, now that we have the roof in place, let's get that roof to display on the floor plan view. As we can see, the walls are here, but we need to show that roof line over the top. To show that, we need to turn on an underlay. So if we set ceiling height as our underlay here, I'll stretch that across so we can have a bit better read as to what it says. The range is the base level ceiling height, and you can see here that the roof is now displaying on the floor plan, and with the pattern fascia and gutter and everything, it's a little bit too sort of overpowering. We just need to represent that as a line of the eave, any hips of valleys and ridge lines. So what we need to do is alter some settings within this view. So the visibility graphic overrides option here in the properties palette is view specific. So what we make a change in this dialog box, will be specific for this view only, and it's not a global throughout the rest of the file. So if we scroll down to the roof and expand the roof, we can see here that we can turn off the fascia, and if you can see in the background over here, I can take the tick out of the fascia and gutter and pick apply, and we see the fascia and the gutter is now not visible in this view. The pattern on the roof, I can pick into that roof area there and alter the patterns to be not visible. For both patterns, there's only the one pattern on there, but we turn it off for both. And the other thing we need to do is override the line style. Currently there's no override, but the pattern of that line needs to be represented as a centre line, so that we don't get them mixed up with overhead cupboards and things like that. So select apply, and I'll just slide that dialog box across so we can see that in the background the roof is representing as a centre line, and I'll pick OK at that. And as we change the roof and make alterations, it's a live change, so try to avoid using lines where we can use overrides, and use the modelled object to create a more accurate drawing. Let's have a look at some site settings. So open your site analysis plan view, double check that we've got 1 to 200 set as our scale in the view control bar down the bottom there. And for the site settings, we need to access the massing and site tab across the top here, and there's a little arrow for the site settings that'll open up the site settings dialog box. The contour line display across the top here, we'll set our contours to display at every 1000, and that'll be referred to later on as being a primary contour. Down here we have some secondary contours that'll come up as well, and I'll set the secondary contours to display every 200mm increments all the way through. And I want to start these contours at -100. It's 5 zeros, -100. So if we are working from 0, they'll display the contours down lower than our floor level. And we'll go all the way up to 300,000 as well. Stretch that across a little so we can see. So -100, set that one to 300,000. That should be 5 zeros, good. Increments of 200, and we'll check that we have degrees set for our property data down here. That's when we're putting in our bearings and distances and all that sort of information when we're doing title documents. And select OK. Next thing we need to do is to set up the way the contours are going to display. So from the Manage tab, go to Object Styles button and locate Topography. Expand the Topography option, and here we've got a few settings to do. So first thing we'll do is set the cut to 5, so that when we do cuts through it for our elevations and things like that. 6 was just a bit heavy, so we'll back it off. And the primary contours default to 6, so I'll pull them both back to 1 for projection and cut. And we'll also change the way the contour lines, instead of being a solid line, we'll change that one to dash. So we have black dash line for our primary contours, and the secondary contours will display as a grey line with a dash loose as the default shows. Let's pick OK. So it's going to zoom out a little bit on this plan so I can get some a bit of topography on there and give the test from these contour lines, make sure they're working. So from the Massing and Site tab, select Topography or Topper Surface, and the first point we'll put in, I'll set one up at -200 and pop it in over top left hand corner, a little bit away from the building. The next one I'll continue around the building as come up over the floor height, this time of 500, and select. Pick on the next one and call that 1 meter, 1000, and pop that one in here. You can see the topper surface starting to appear, and we've got contour lines running through as well, so everything seems to be set up okay. I go -600 for the next and the final point. So we've got our 4 points in there, and pick OK. What you can see, or should be able to see there, I'll change that back from thin lines, thick lines, is that the darker line, dashed line running through there, representing the 0.1 meter mark, and the grey contour lines representing the 200mm increments. Primary contour, and these are the secondary contours. Let's label those contours. So select the Label Contours button from the Massing and Site tab, and pick and drag a line through the contours, and pick again. Those labels running all the way through, indicating the 600, 400, 200, -200, -400. Generally, once we set up our building and start working, we'll work the building up around the 100, 200 meter mark so that we don't end up with minus signs. Not preferable, good to test in our template, but minus signs tend to get lost in drawings. We try to avoid using a minus where we can. Select those contour tags and edit the type. We'll rename that to 2mm Arial, and alter the text height to 2. 1.5 is just a little too small. We'll also go to the units format and remove the tick from the use project settings, change it to meters with 2 decimal points, and OK, and OK. So we should have our contour labels looking a little bit bigger in 2mm text and represented in meters to 2 decimal points. We can then check and see how that building is sitting on that site. So it's actually a little dog kennel up the top here. Should take you off to your 3D view, and we can zoom in, have a look and see where that topography and how that relates to our buildings. Just spinning around using the zoom tools, and we can see the building just sitting below the surface there, and we should be able to see those contours actually displaying in 3D as well. I'll just pop into the east elevation, and I'm going to pick on one of those level lines, being our floor level, and I'll lift it up. I'm going to set a floor level of maybe 400. Press enter. You'll see the whole building has lifted, and returning to a 3D view, and we should see that the building is now just a smidge of concrete just coming up above ground at that point there, and ready for us to do site cuts to the topography as required.